everyone, welcome to another Animation Friday, and today I thought it would be interesting to dive into something that's a little bit more adult this time, as opposed to for children when it comes to animation. So I'm going to be discussing the most popular adult animated TV shows. If there's anything that um, animation is known for in the adult realm, it has usually been showcased through television. Um, they're usually done in that format, I think, because um, it's it's a it's a it's a format that I think uh, ultimately works more for television because usually when people see animated films on the big screen, they usually automatically think it's for children. Um, whereas adult animated cartoons can be showcased a lot more efficiently on a television screen, and therefore I think actually end up being more profitable as a result. And they have had, I think, a significant impact on our culture, at least the ones that became fairly popular. I would say that the trend sort of started probably around the um, 80s, probably more later 80s, um, and but I guess you could say late 80s being sort of the birth or the start of this kind of formatting, and then skyrockets within the 90s and early 2000s and so on, and the rest being sort of history, I guess you could say, for adult television that is animated. Now, I'm going to be discussing the ones that are, I think, the most well recognized and the ones that I think that have had the most impact. It's not to say that these are the best out of them, but I think as far as best is concerned, you could probably classify it under the popular category because a lot of people ended up watching these shows and got invested in these got invested in these shows, and even some of these shows still continue to this day. So I'm going to be first discussing all of them in no particular order of popularity, but I think these ones that I've listed have had the greatest amount of influence over the years. First, let's talk about Family Guy. I find Family Guy probably to be one of the most divisive of the list. That being because I have seen the love and hate camps of this show. Like, there are just people who despise this show, who think it is too grotesque, or the humor is not as smart, or there's a ton of things that end up being sort of referenced, like pop cultural references. Family Guy's fairly famous for, and they don't like how it approaches its style of just making it more lowbrow humor as opposed to very smart intellectual humor. And that's really where I think the hate camp stands in regards to that show. And then you got the love camp who thinks Seth MacFarlane is an absolute genius and is God and incarnate, even though Seth MacFarlane I don't believe believes in God, but that's beside the point. Point being is that they feel that this show speaks to them, and they don't mind that it has stupid moments. They don't mind that the humor is lowbrow. They don't mind those kinds of things because that's the thing that they're looking for to entertain them. So I actually, personally, in my opinion, I stand sort of in the middle between these two. Perfectly honest. I really do. I think there are certain parts of Family Guy that I think are brilliant, and other parts that I think are just not as funny or not as entertaining, in my opinion. So I kind of understand both sides of the argument, but at the same time, I hold to my opinion in that I don't have a strong inkling to one particular side. But I do like the show. I do find myself enjoying watching it at times. Is it something that I would watch continuously over and over and over again? No. But at the same time, I still appreciate it in a mild sense. Like I enjoy viewing it once in a while. It's I guess you could say some people like it to have lowbrow humor as a way of it being really refreshing because everybody tries to be smart when it comes to humor, and it's nice to see, someone who some and it's nice to see a TV show that just says nope, we're not going to go for that. So yeah, that's kind of how I see it. When it comes to Family Guy, I would say I definitely watched it a lot more in my teens than I do now. Maybe because I gotten a little bit more adult, so that stuff doesn't really appeal to me as much as it did when I was a teenager. But at the same time, I still find certain parts of it funny and entertaining and engaging. And I think there's a lot of memorable moments with the characters, and I think there's a lot of wacky, crazy scenarios that they put in that ultimately end up working. Sometimes they don't, but again, it's just kind of one of those things where I try to treat this as as subjectively as I possibly can. Um, Now, there is, I think, another complaint too when it comes to Family Guy, and that is that it's sort of borrowing a lot from other television shows, particularly The Simpsons. And these two shows, I think, have been sort of like rivals ever since Simpsons came out. Family Guy soon followed, and they sort of had similar focuses. They both focus on the family. Um, all of the characters sort of have a quasi similar dynamic. You've got um, basically three kids. That's the same for both shows. You have the main protagonist who is a dummy, and then you have the wife who is very smart and kind of balances the husband out. So that's really the basic similarities between the show. Their humor, though, is completely different. And I'll sort of discuss The Simpsons later on as I'm going through this list for you guys. But the way I see Family Guy is Guy was trying to kind of be more shock value, at least in my opinion. I believe Family Guy is more oriented around trying to push the boundaries when it comes to animation. Um, and what I mean by that is they do it in a way that creates, again, sort of this really wow, how disgustingly disturbing that is, but at the same time, it's hilarious. At times, again, that's another thing too. Sometimes and that's just with my opinion. Sometimes Family Guy does it well, and other times they sometimes don't do it all too well. But for the most part, I still think Family Guy still maintains its identity, even though it is kind of borrowing from other television shows. Some people don't like the idea that Peter Griffin sort of represents, the bumbling idiot, and I think a lot of people who are on the male side of the human race do not appreciate that. And I understand that argument, but at the same time, Peter Griffin's just a character. He's not a representation of every man out there. Um, but at the same time, he still highlights the kind of aspects within our human nature that I think really border on the level of stupid. I mean, I think we can all be a little bit dumb sometimes. I think we can all make some dumb decisions. Not to the extent that Peter Griffin does, but again, he's sort of exploiting that aspect of the human psyche. Um, can he be annoying at times? Yes, I understand that completely. He can be annoying. But I still find sometimes he can be charming, and other times, he's just kind of too all over the place, or he's just unbelievably stupid that you just want to slap. So yeah, he's a really all over the place, off the wall character. So I think more so than Homer Simpson, who's maybe a little bit more grounded. Peter's just off the walls, insane at times. So I think that's what Family Guy's goal was. It was supposed to take sort of the ideas of The Simpsons, but incorporate it in their own way, and as a result, focus more on shock value, focus more on trying to do the more lowbrow humor. Um, and I think it ultimately ended up paying off for the show because the show got so popular. Regardless of whether you dislike or like the show, it was a hit and people responded to it. In particular, I think teenagers responded to the show. I remember a lot of teenagers loving Family Guy and, just having jokes about Family Guy. Heck, there's even references the Family Guy does, and then you look up the references later on. Like, I remember when Brian sang that one song, and then all of these people were referencing Family Guy because they got that song from Family Guy. So again, it's sort of bringing in all of these, references to pop culture and all of these outside scenarios that I don't think really The Simpsons focused on as a show. So again, there is a lot more outlandish things that I think happen in Family Guy, and that's why it got recognized for it, because it was just so, it was just so, um, it was just so insanely saturated with craziness. And I think people bought into it. And you could even argue too on an animation level, like there's so much you can get away with. And Family Guy, I think, used that animation to really get away with showcasing some really funny moments and references to other people. So yeah, it's just one of those things where you just kind of take the show for what it is, and I think there's some appreciation you can have for it, um, if you realize that ultimately it is what it is. It's not trying to be this other thing. It's not trying to be very smart and witty. It's just trying to be. Um, it's just about being more around shock value, more around upping the ante, and doing that creativity as opposed to the intellectual creativity. So that's kind of my understanding when it comes to the show. I understand the complaining and I understand the love, um, but personally, I think it's just one of the shows that I just could not ignore and not put on this list as being one of the most recognized out of all of the adult-oriented animated television shows. Next one I want to talk about is actually a more recent uh, animated television show for adults, and that's Archer. Yes, Archer. Archer is about, again, a stupid person, but a spy who is a stupid person named Archer, out of all people. Yes, that is the main character, and that is the title of the show. And again, you might be saying, "Oh, they're pulling a Family Guy Simpsons. He's dumb, he's fat. He's probably Family Man, right?" But then he goes off into spying. No. He's pretty much kind of he kind of is a mixture, though, of the personalities that we usually see within these animated television shows. But he is like he's buff. He's basically like an American version of James Bond, except he's stupid. And he makes really bad decisions. And he is not married. Well, he's not married either. He doesn't have a family, so that's another difference than incorporating the family dynamic for shock value. He is it basically, the show revolves around him, the other characters that are within the show, and the ridiculous scenarios that he maybe even ends up putting the other characters in, or the crazy things that they have to go through in order to complete a mission or something like that. So it's really all about kind of like that camaraderie between all of the characters, and Archer sort of being the center focus because he is the center of stupid, because he makes really, really uh, off the wall decisions, and as a result, this ends up in a lot of laughs and a lot of crazy. Um, and The interesting thing too about Archer is its animation. Now, with Family Guy and Simpsons, you can tell completely that they are based around comedy, like that their animation is comedic looking. It doesn't look like something that you would expect. Uh, it look it looks like what you would expect, but with Archer's show, it doesn't really do that. The animation is not even really all that good. I mean, if you really look at the lisping and how they talk, it's kind of awkward, and it looks a little bit off and strange, and their movements are not as flowy like something like The Simpsons or Family Guy. They're kind of just rigid because they make the characters look so comic booky, I'd say, uh, that initially when you're watching it, you wouldn't think that it's a comedy. Uh, but it is, and it is centered around this idea. And and the interesting thing too, about this show is how it sort of deals with the premise of spying, and um, it doesn't really have, I think, really a center focus. I mean, you could argue that there's some shock value within the show. You could make the argument too that it kind of um, satirizes the whole concept of the idea of what we would envision a spy doing. So in a way, it does something different than what shows like The Simpsons and Family Guy did, and it definitely works, I think, to the show's advantage as a result. And I think it is definitely uh, worth a recommendation. I'm sure there's those that don't like the show for various reasons, but I still think it's really one of the more popular ones that I've seen out there. It's one of the more ones that people like to reference to at times, and I think there's a lot of craziness within it that people find enjoyable. And again, the humor is not in any way intellectual. It's all kind of uh, it sort of maintains kind of that same level of stupidity humor that Family Guy does, but I'd say Family Guy is a little bit more on the level of pushing up the ante, whereas Archer is maybe a little bit more reserved. I mean, yeah, he's stupid, but I wouldn't say he's unbelievably um I mean, he can be maybe obnoxiously stupid at times, but no way on the level that Peter Griffin can. So again, I think the show takes what other comedic shows have done that are in animation, but it ties it in with the spy world well by satirizing it, and it kind of just tries to draw away from that over the topness, but it still focuses on similar elements. I would say definitely though the pop culture is not really there. It's just more about the characters, their scenarios, and how they play out in a fairly comedic fashion, and how everybody laughs at Archer because he's just unbelievably stupid. um, and an American. So, um, again, that's no insult to my people of America, but he kind of just embodies the American spy because he's not British and this isn't a British television show. So uh, he just kind of takes it on that level though. of kind of embracing that stupidity, but not like over exaggerating it so much as Family Guy. But it's there, and it is emphasized, and the focus is largely more on the camaraderie between all of the characters, both male and female, and all the crazy things that they have to go through, and the plot areas that are explored. So yeah, if you like that kind of satirization, um, and like the way that ultimately the show showcases itself, then I think you can find enjoyment. But I do understand if there's probably some people who have certain issues with it. I couldn't really express to you what those issues are because I haven't seen actually complaints, as opposed to Family Guy where I've actually seen like really like lots of complaining about. But again, you can sort of take it for what it's worth. Now let's talk about another one that is famous and that I said I was going to talk about. The Simpsons. Yes, The Simpsons. With its memorable characters and really well done scenarios. I think The Simpsons does something unique compared to what shows like Archer and Family Guy do when it comes to its humor. With The Simpsons, yeah, they go for the kind of, lowbrow, haha, funny humor, but they also try to do some kind of a message that relates to real life, that goes into something that can be identifiable within a real life scenario, what a real life family would go through. And I think that's why a lot of people gravitated towards The Simpsons when it initially came out, um, or when it initially became popular. I mean, because I actually think that it didn't start off all that strong, and then eventually it skyrocketed. But I think also the animation was a little bit different too before they had like the final version of their animation. So I think that was another thing too. But that's what I think makes the Simpsons so unique from these other two shows that I've mentioned is that they do approach scenarios in a comedic fashion, but do provide some commentary that I think is real and feels genuine. For example, there was this one episode of where I believe the child's name is Bart. I apologize. I'm horrible with names. I'm horrible with the Simpsons because I've watched it on and off. So I'm really bad with character names. I know Homer. That I know. And I think Marge is the wife, but the kids still throw me off. But I think the son is named Bart. So there's this one episode of Bart I remember seeing where he keeps trying to pass this one test, and that this is also the thing too is this one test really determines whether or not he's going to move up or not, and he just can't do it, and he sort of has kind of like a breakdown because of it, and I find something like that to be so identifiable, and understanding that sometimes no matter how hard you try, you're just going to fail at something every time. It's not because you're a bad person or you're not trying. It's just because, there's just some things in life you can't do. There's just some things in life that people aren't talented at, and don't have the capacity to do. And it was nice to see such an episode showcased. And again, they had little funny bits and moments in there, but it was bringing home certain scenarios that are identifiable. Family Guy might do it that once in a while, but I don't think as common. It's not as common as The Simpsons. Also, and again, Archer doesn't really present anything that I find really like, wow, I identified with that, or wow, that made me really think. A lot of the time with Archer, it's just more wacky scenarios, and I really don't learn all that much with Archer, but I do find myself entertained by it. Whereas with The Simpsons, I am both entertained, but at the same time, I feel like I'm getting some kind of understanding and personal connection with it, because they try to put in scenarios that kind of apply within daily life, that people go through. So that's why I think these shows, they're trying to do different things, and that's, I think, how The Simpsons ultimately ends up being unique, and therefore I think that's why it maintains to be one of the most popular animated TV shows for adults. Now, the second to last one I want to mention is actually, I believe the creators of The Simpsons made this show. I have to look it up again, but I'm almost positive they did, because the animation is really similar. And I almost could swear that I remember somebody saying when they were introduced, because one of my teachers actually introduced us to Futurama, and I believe she did say that this was a show that the Simpsons did. The creators of some of the creators of The Simpsons did. But what I find interesting about Futurama is it tries to approach it, I think, on that Simpsons level of trying to have like identifiable moments and episodes that you can derive some kind of meaning from, but do it so in a comedic fashion. But I think also the world is actually really creative and funny, and leads to a lot of genuinely funny moments, because basically with Futurama you have a show that's a comedy that's animated that takes place in the future. And when you do that kind of a thing, you ultimately showcase a lot of potential to do wacky and off the wall things, and that's what Futurama does with its comedy. It inserts itself within the world, whereas Family Guy inserts it into our outside world that exists. Futurama does that with its own world that it creates, which I think is very creative, and really what an animated show should do, is just try to use the setting to their full advantage, and it works. There are bits and moments where I'm just genuinely laughing at these aspects where you see the world kind of operating in such a bizarre way, and seeing all of these characters and having all of these little memorable moments, and I think that's what ultimately holds it up as one of the more popular ones and one of the more recognizable ones when it comes to uh, animated TV shows. And I would say it's definitely one that will probably remain to be kind of alongside The Simpsons, but probably not as popular, as well recognized as The Simpsons. But at the same time, I still think that there was a lot of people who gravitated towards this show, and found its antics enjoyable, and I do find them enjoyable as well. I'm sure there's people that would say that they don't care for it, but I still think it holds up, and I think it's one of the more recognizable ones. Again, not as recognizable as some of the other ones that I mentioned on this list, but again, I think it still lends itself for recommendation, and I could see why people would be gravitated towards a show like that. Now, last one I want to mention is South Park. Now, regardless of whether or not you dislike or like South Park, it is probably one of the most influential, probably up there with The Simpsons, I'd say. And why is that? Well, because the writers and the animators really have no barriers. They will target anybody. They will make fun of whoever they can get their hands on to make fun of. They will use current news to its max. They know that once they see that there's a big story out, you're going to guarantee that a South Park is going to make fun of it. Because that's how they operate. They look at something and that is popular, and they completely satirize it. That is their job, going in every day to go out and make something creative satirizing something that's popular out there in the media. Um, and they kind of just do it with no shame. They're like, we do whatever we want. We don't care what people think. And I think um, that kind of ability to not care is a really good trait to have, especially when you want to go for this really um, in, intense attitude. So yeah, it definitely works to the show's advantage. Um, and in doing so, it provides sometimes, I think, good commentary on various things that are going on, and sort of making fun of all of these crazy scenarios that are put out there and you know showcased in the media. And it just expresses what I think a lot of people are thinking when it comes to these scenarios that they showcase. So it is an intelligent show in that sense. It's doing some intelligent form of humor by commenting and satirizing it in such a way that it reflects onto our thoughts and ideas as to thinking of, yeah, how ridiculous was that scenario? Or how ridiculous this person is, um, within our media culture or whatnot. But there are times where it does go for the more Family Guy um, type humor, like with the potty jokes and all of that. It achieves that humor on that level. But it also does provide some kind of, I think, fun commentary. Um, and in doing so, it becomes a little bit more, I wouldn't say like in any way overly intellectual, but it goes to the point where it does convey its storylines in a sort of smart, sophisticated way, but not so in a way that, it's it's like the old humor or like other sitcoms that are not animated. But it is probably the most one of the most influential shows out there, and that's just not just for its category, but in general. And I'd even argue all of these shows probably do hold up as some of the most popular TV shows, period. But they're animated, and they do showcase that animation. And again, animation South Park, not good. Kind of like Archers, it doesn't really flow all too well. But the audience totally forgives that and completely understands that, if you're working on a low budget, I mean, just do the animation, or just do the, um, just do well with the writing and you're good. So yeah, that's what I think. I think ultimately, though, all I can say about all of these shows, I think they're all interesting and unique in their own special ways. And I think, regardless of whether you hate or love any of these shows, I'd say that they probably had the most influence, I feel. Out of looking at all the other shows out there, it almost feels like these ones really did kind of at least leave an impact. And they're the ones that I'm most familiar with. But I'm sure that there's others that I didn't mention that people enjoy maybe a little bit more, or think that that one's maybe a little bit more popular, a little bit more, or deserves maybe a little bit more attention. I mean, and I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts on all of these shows. But ultimately, I think that's really all I can say about them. But again, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.